Hello, students and lovers of history. Welcome to another Wag Swag Productions. I'm your host, Brandon Wagner. Today we are looking and identifying the reasons behind Indian policy and the wars between Native Americans and the U.S. government, particularly in regards to those west of the Mississippi, both during and after the Civil War. We're looking at the relationship between Native Americans and agricultural development and industrialization. To start with some of the history of the Plains Indians, what we know is that they had lived on the plains for at least hundreds of years, if not thousands. Now, they had been very much influenced by the Columbian Exchange, and if you remember from chapter 1, way back at the beginning of the year, one of those big animals that came thanks to the Columbian Exchange was the horses, originally introduced by the Spanish in the late 1500s. Native Americans eventually got a hold of these wild horses, which started to roam freely and breed on the plains. This greatly changed their way of life and made the Native Americans much more nomadic and more efficient in hunting buffalo. Of course, the buffalo became a way of life for Native Americans living on the plains. Plains Indians' life centered around the buffalo, which they saw as a very divine gift from the god, the great creator, as they saw it. Of course, this lifestyle would soon be changing thanks to the settlement of Western settlers. In this review today, we'll be looking at 4 Native American tribes the United States government was dealing with during the time period between the Civil War and the very end of the 19th century. Those tribes are the Lakota Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Nez Perce, and of course the Apache. Now, there are multiple chiefs that are talked about in this chapter. Those are Geronimo of the Apache, Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce. We have Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, and Red Cloud of the Lakota Sioux, and Black Kettle of the Cheyenne. We'll go more in depth into each of those tribes, and especially looking at what battles or massacres actually they were involved with. Let's start with Black Kettle of the Cheyenne. Now, towards the end of the Civil War, 1864, the Cheyenne had been skirmishing with Western settlers, and this had become a problem. Many Native Americans in the Cheyenne tribe were stealing cattle and horses from Western settlers, and some conflicts happened here and there. And by the end of 1864, about 200 American settlers had been killed in conflicts with the Native Americans. Of course, this caused alarm, and the US government sent out forces to try to pacify them. What happened at the end of 1864 was the US government coming out offering an olive branch for the Cheyenne to come to Fort Laramie and make a peace treaty. Black Kettle decided, okay, let's do this. And the day before the treaty was supposed to happen, camped near the fort at Sand Creek. Well, the US Army taking advantage of this, and Black Kettle thinking that all was good, that they were not going to be fighting anymore, ended up being massacred along with many women and children Native Americans by the US Army, which is infamously known as the Battle of Sand Creek. Native Americans, about 12 years after the massacre at Sand Creek, would have their revenge. That, of course, is the famous Battle of Little Bighorn. At this battle, under the leadership of Crazy Horse, Red Cloud, and Sitting Bull, the forces under General Custer would charge in, greatly outnumbered by thousands of Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. What would happen next was the complete destruction of General Custer's forces after they were completely surrounded and cut off from the rest of the army. This was a small victory, just a drop in the bucket though, one of the last great hurrahs for the Native American Plains Indians. Another Native American tribe from the American Southwest is known as the Apache, a very fearsome Native American tribe, very much feared by US settlers and Mexicans. The Apache were led by the chief known as Geronimo, and the Apache waged a successful guerrilla campaign for over 6 years, doing hit-and-run tactics against US settlers and then fleeing south of the border across the Mexican border. as they would flee from U.S. pursuers. U.S. Army would not cross the border into Mexico, as they did not have permission. They would then do the same thing to Mexican settlers until the Mexican Army came, and again they would retreat north across the border into the United States. They were going back and forth. They were doing these border raids. Eventually, though, by 1886, they had the United States and the Mexican Army joining forces and allowing each other to do cross raids in order to capture the Apache. Finally, the Apache were brought to submission in 1886 when Geronimo surrendered and was captured. The ultimate aim of the US government was not to just simply destroy the Native Americans with a genocidal manner, but it was to mainly civilize them, get them to adopt Western ways, or embrace the white man's way. This, of course, was done by pushing them onto reservations where they can be controlled, monitored, and no longer live that nomadic lifestyle. Because that nomadic lifestyle did not fit with the modernization of the United States. Industrialization, agriculture, they had to either assimilate or be destroyed. And that was the ultimate goal in the end, assimilation. By 1887, the United States government passed the Dawes Act, which made Native American tribes to try to break up those reservations into individual plots of lands so Native American families can homestead. Of course, most of these plots of land were very small, and many Native Americans were not skilled in much of the industrialized agriculture that was taking root at the time. Many Native American families ended up selling their land, or the land they were given was not rich enough to grow many crops and become profitable. Finally, in the end, Indian schools were set up on many of these reservations, where many of the young children, or even away from the reservations, young children were kidnapped, actually, almost kidnapped, by the US government and brought to these Indian schools to become westernized, give up their pagan religion to embrace Christianity, cut their long hair, wear Western clothing, learn to read and write in English, and of course become productive citizens. This is how many of the Native American tribes in the end were assimilated. While many today still hold on to their cultural heritage, it is a mere shadow of what it used to be. As a way of defiance and holding on to their culture, in 1890, the Lakota Sioux rallied around a new movement, a religious movement. This was called the Ghost Dance. This idea of the Ghost Dance was that they would dance and worship to bring back their ancestors, and one day the buffalo would return and all the white men and settlers would disappear, so the Lakota Sioux can resume their nomadic lifestyle. This dance was pretty harmless, but it was getting many Native Americans to conglomerate together. This caught the attention, of course, of the US military, who saw this as a threat and maybe a possible insurrection. They were afraid of this possible insurrection, so what did they do? The US government banned the Ghost Dance, making it illegal. Does that violate anything that you remember? What type of constitutional rights would banning a religious practice be, especially if it's not hurting anybody? Well, eventually the Lakota Sioux, feeling threatened, walked off the reservation. Big groups of them continued to do their ghost dances, and the United States military followed them. In Wounded Knee, South Dakota, a group of over 200 men, women, and children were moving along peacefully, not fighting anybody, but the US military surrounded them and demanded their arms. Is that another constitutional right that's being violated there? Comment below, tell me what about those two constitutional rights and what amendments they belong to, which are being violated. Well, in the minutes that followed, historians say that a struggle ensued between a Native American who refused to give up his rifle to a US soldier. What happens next is unclear, but what we do know is a shot was fired. And the next thing you know, the trigger-happy soldiers surrounding the Native Americans opened fire, killing over 200 Native American men, women, and children. On top of that, they also killed some of their own soldiers who were involved in trying to disarm them. It was a pretty bad massacre right there, to say the least, and this was in Wounded Knee, South Dakota. This event in 1890 marks the end of the nomadic lifestyle of Native Americans. After that, they're all forced onto reservations children forced into Indian schools, and eventually all assimilated into US society. That's it for today on the review on Chapter 17, Lesson 3. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks again for watching. Please subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always,